It is time to get started today, and we've had a change of plans. I'd asked Dan Vanderstelp to read the statement that he shared last Monday at the Hermiston School Board meeting, and then just let him share that experience with you. And Dan, I think you know that Dan's a veterinarian, and Dan's on call, and Dan got called in. So he is not going to be here this morning. So I can talk to him and see if maybe he can do that next Sunday, but it won't be happening today. I also have in front of me something that Kelly Bissinger gave to me, and I didn't ask Kelly this, but I do see Kelly is here. Kelly, do you want to talk about this at all and share what stands out to you on this is something you get, I understand, regularly?
Yes, it comes once a week. This is actually from a mutual fund company called First Trust. Can't hear me?
Well, for the recording, it'll be better if it's,
This is actually from a mutual fund company, and believe me, they are into statistics, and they will do a great deal, but they start talking about what they call a COVID-19 tracker. And what stands out on this is they've got a graph here that's talking about U.S. mortality rates in kids ages 13 to 18. Back in 2008, they did a comparison of respiratory disease deaths as compared to drug and alcohol-induced deaths. And the drug and alcohol-induced deaths is far higher than the respiratory diseases by far. And then in 2020, they tracked the same thing. And expected deaths, or the deaths that actually occurred, was 65% higher than respiratory deaths from any cause. So what that points to is what we're going through with the masking and asking people to stay home from school has put so much stress on this age of children that suicide rates, drug and alcohol rates have just gone through the roof. And it's very, very telling what this has done to that group of kids during that time. There's all sorts of things that they track with this, and I can make some of these available if people would be interested in seeing these on a weekly basis. Okay. But it's a very good piece on what's taking place.
So thank you, Kelly. So this is, I guess you'd say this is scientific data, correct? It is data. There's bar graphs here. They've done their surveying, their researching. This is the conclusion that they've drawn. And does that then drive policy or not? And I think that would be the next question that you'd want to ask from this. Are politicians, school boards, governors, secretaries of states, attorney generals, are people going to look at this because it's very obvious, the trend line, what it's suggesting, and are they going to react to it for the good of kids, or are they going to ignore it? So, all right, just two things that I'll give by way of just updates in the news, things that we've been tracking really since this class began. And I'm going to just read from two different articles. The one involves Secretary of Education, some congressmen, they're asking questions. Let me just read this to you. A pair of congressional congressmen asked Secretary Miguel Cardona They sent a letter to him following reports that a 12-year-old Florida girl attempted suicide on campus after talks with her school about transitioning her gender. Now, it's the rest of this that's really interesting. There's nothing disturbing in what I've read to this point. Well, there's several things disturbing. I mean, a 12-year-old child attempting suicide, that's disturbing. But the idea that a 12-year-old girl would have gender dysphoria is really what this first couple of sentences is telling us, and that's also disturbing, but it's not surprising. That's maybe the way I should put this. There's nothing really surprising about this, but it's what comes next that's surprising and disturbing. So a couple of Republican lawmakers there, Virginia Fox, a senator from North Carolina, sent a letter to the Secretary of Education on Thursday regarding the Clay County, Florida student's suicide attempt after speaking with her school about becoming a boy. According to the girl's father, the school had been in conversations with the girl about a gender transition, had begun calling her a boy, and had assigned her a new name. They did all this without notifying the parents. Now, that's the primary thing that I want to just draw your attention to. They did all this without notifying the parents. Parents have every right to assess and access vital information regarding their children, an indisputable fact that the Department of Education doesn't seem to respect. The disturbing trend of school districts withholding information from parents continues to grow at an alarming rate, and there's little to no accountability coming from the administration. How many more children will be put in harm's way if school districts are not being held to account? Skipping a page here. Unfortunately, these decisions by the school district are part of a disturbing trend. And let's see, there's one other. The father of the elementary school student who attempted suicide at school filed a lawsuit with Child and Parental Rights campaign against the school, alleging a school counselor had been secretly meeting with his daughter about her questioning her gender. The counselor had told the father that his daughter did not want to talk about the issue with her family, with her parents, due to her parents being Catholic. Okay, and I'll just stop there. This sort of thing is happening, I suspect, fairly frequently across the country. Months and months ago, we read the Oregon regulations coming straight from the authorities. I downloaded them, read them, and shared them with you. This sort of thing can happen in Oregon any day of the week, to where you have a child who comes and says, I have gender dysphoria, I identify with a gender contrary to my biological sex, and Sam becomes Sally at school. And yet when the school talks to the parents, Sally's name is still Sam. So if the child says, I don't feel comfortable with my parents knowing this, the school will lie to parents. What else could you call it? The schools are lying to parents. They're using the one pronoun when they talk to mom and dad, a different pronoun when they talk to the child at school, different names, etc. And so this is a very, very disturbing trend, and it goes back to what was going on here a few months ago in the Virginia governor's race, right? Where the whole question of really who does have authority in terms of kids. Is it the school? Is it the parents? Is it the school board? Is it the parents? Is it the state? Is it the parents? And we realize that both the state and parents have an interest in children, and a justifiable interest in children, but who has the primary authority? And so I'd share just one verse with you from Scripture as we try to think about an issue like this, and it's Psalm 127 and verse 3. And I've shared this verse one other time in the past. I'll read it from two different translations. The first is the New American Standard, or the NASB, and the second is the ESV. And they're both good renderings. And then I'll read to you the lexical definition of probably the most important word in this verse, and then just make some observations. So Psalm 127, verse 3, in the New American Standard Version of the Bible reads this way: "Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward." The ESV reads, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb, a reward." And so the word that I want to focus on for a second is the word gift, the word heritage, or more precisely, the Hebrew word that is behind the English rendering gift or heritage. And so if you look up the word in terms of its lexical sense, this is what you'll read. Inheritance. So this word means inheritance. Behold, children are an inheritance of the Lord. He goes on to say, any piece of property that passes by law to an heir on the death of an owner. Now, that doesn't mean that children are property. That's not the point. This word is used 222 times in the Bible, but it's used oftentimes in terms of you have land, you have an estate, and that estate is passed on to your descendants because, of course, you own this estate and it goes to your descendants. But the word does suggest this idea of authority over it, belongs to you. You have the responsibility for it. And all of that would, of course, apply to children. So again, I'll read this. Any piece of property that passes by law to an heir on the death of an owner, sometimes regarding God's promises to his people, like the land of Israel or a heavenly kingdom. So the land of Israel was a gift from God to the people. There are 222 uses in the Old Testament, and the primary meaning is possession or inheritance. And so when you think about that, then, the question that comes to mind is, are children a gift from God to the school board or to their parents? Are they a gift to God to the state or to their parents? And I think the answer is so obvious in this verse. Being that they are a gift from God to parents implies that parents have primary stewardship over their children. And that from a Christian worldview perspective, school boards or states do not have the right to simply disregard parents, as we see increasingly happening today. Now, besides the issue of disregarding parents in situations like this one, and this should trouble you because I think most people would say that being honest and truthful is part of being honorable and right. Wouldn't you agree with that? That to deliberately deceive and to lie to parents and to keep parents in the dark about what's going on in the life of their own son or daughter is fundamentally wrong, and it's fundamentally dishonorable, and it's fundamentally immoral. And yet here's a story in the news of last week where we have exactly that sort of thing happening. Now, I don't know the other details. The girl attempted suicide. I don't know how she did that. I don't know what that looked like. I'm not saying that there aren't other issues that contributed to her psychological discomfort and all the rest of it. But the bare facts of the case is you've got a 12-year-old girl in a school district in Florida who attempted suicide and has all these issues going on in her life, and the people who are totally in the dark about it are her parents. And the reason they're in the dark is because the school and the school counselor presumes to know more than parents and presumes to have the right to essentially parent this child. And situations like that are just so backwards and so wrong. I just don't even have words really for it. The other one that we've been tracking now for a while, and this one seems to be, maybe it's going in a good direction, but it's the Leah Thomas situation, the swimmer. I'm going to read to you again from an article. This is involving 16 members of the swim team for the University of Pennsylvania, and these are the women on the swim team who've been being abused essentially by the university through this entire situation. And so there's some statements being made now. This is a letter sent to the university and to the Ivy League. We fully support Leah Thomas in her decision. Now, again, I'm reading what's here. I don't agree with that. Leah Thomas is not a female, and so using a female pronoun is dishonest. It's just dishonest. It's not scientific. It's not truthful. But that's what this says here. Leah Thomas, in her decision to affirm her gender identity and to transition from a man to a woman, the swimmers wrote, they say Leah has every right to live her life authentically. However, we also recognize that when it comes to sports competition, that the biology of sex is a separate issue from someone's gender identity. Biologically, Leah holds an unfair advantage over competition in the women's category, as evidenced by her rankings that have bounced from 462 as a male to number 1 as a female. So, last time she competed, remember, this is the situation of the biological male who's still biological male, but goes as female, is swimming with the Division I swimming women's team. For 3 years, swam as a male at a Division I level. He was ranked 462nd as a male, but now as a female, he's the best swimmer in the country, swimming against the girls. What's that? What's that? Yeah. Skipping down a little bit, a parent of one of the 16 who spoke to Fox News on the condition of anonymity said that the girls were told not to speak to the media, and that when they expressed concerns about the unfairness of competing against a large athlete like Thomas, who had gone through male puberty, their concerns were dismissed. So in other words, the university has told these girls they can't talk about this. The parent goes on to state, it's been incredibly frustrating having to learn that our daughters were put in a situation where they were not allowed to speak about something that was so blatantly obvious to them every single day, and find little support from the university other than, hey, get some counseling. He said the university athletic department sent in a publications representative who essentially told the girls, you should say nothing, here's your script, don't say a word. No one is unsympathetic towards Leah's plight, but at the end of the day, it's a competitive sport, and for the sake of fair competition, having Leah act as if she's a male is just not, having Leah act as if she's a female. You see how bizarre this is to even read that sentence? That sentence makes no sense. Having Leah act as if she's a female is not fair. But that's the culture we're living in now. The pronouns are all backwards. I mean, she is a female pronoun, so if she is a she, then she is a female. But it should, of course, say, have Leah act as if, anyway, I don't know. The parent said the girls face a pressure to conform. And that's the takeaway primarily from this article, a pressure to conform from the NCAA, from the university, from the culture at large, a pressure to conform on the issue, and that the team's camaraderie has been severely disrupted. You think? So again, what this story has, well, let me ask the question, what does this story have in connection to the other story? Besides all the gender issues, there's something else that these stories have in common. They're lies.
I just thought of something came to me in that other story you was talking about, where the school actually tells the girl, they're teaching him to lie.
Yes.
We all, that's what we don't know about all of us, and yet they're telling the kids, and they're teaching them actually to lie.
Yeah, they're teaching the child to deceive his or her parents. Lie to your parents. We're going to lie to your parents, and you can too. And when you think about it in those terms, it is hard not to think of, a book like 1984, or the sort of totalitarianism within the Soviet Union of a generation ago, where the state really did come to a place of saying, the children belong to us, and we will turn the children against their parents. And that absolutely is what happened in the Soviet Union. So these are disturbing stories that, at so many different levels. All right, I thought we would look today at Matthew 22. It's a little bit different. We're going to actually spend the rest of our time just in a text. But I think this is such an important text, it's just worth spending half an hour or so looking at it. Because it relates to this issue that right now Christians are really forced to struggle with, and that's the issue of what is our relationship to the state, and what do we owe to the state, and what do we not owe to the state. And so there are a few passages, I think, in the Bible that we can go to that will give us more help than this particular passage of Scripture. There are, of course, other passages that we look at on this question. Romans 13 would be the most famous of those passages, I think. But there are others also. There are examples, for instance, of civil disobedience in the Bible. The midwives in the Old Testament, in the Exodus story, is an example of this, where they refuse to obey the civil authority, namely Pharaoh. But this is a really interesting text, and I think it's a very important one in this whole discussion. And as we think about what's happening, what we looked at last Sunday, the law in Canada and the law from the city council in Indiana, where churches are being put in a position where if they hold to their Christian conviction, their Christian worldview, they might find themselves in a lot of trouble. And pastors could actually be arrested, it would seem, in some of these situations. We can certainly envision that coming in the perhaps not that distant future. And so a text like this one, therefore, I think becomes extremely relevant to that whole discussion. And it comes in the context of Jesus. If you go back in Matthew in chapter 21, you have the Triumphal Entry. And so Jesus has come into the city of Jerusalem. It's Holy Week. It's the last week of his life. Crucifixion is coming. And as part of that final week, there is this conflict whereby a variety of different individuals or groups come to Jesus asking him difficult questions, or questions where they're trying to trap him in one way or another. And so this text is in the middle of all of that. So let me just read some of this to you. Matthew 22, the text is verse 15 through 22. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him. Now, I don't think that comment is made in Mark or in the other accounts of this. They sent their disciples to him. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they're the junior devils. Or maybe this is just a fresh face. Maybe Jesus has had enough encounters with the senior devils that by sending someone new, someone fresh, they're thinking maybe Jesus' guard would be down. I don't know. But it's an interesting observation. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. Now, that, of course, is interesting because you have two different groups mentioned here. One's the Pharisees and the other's the Herodians. And I'm assuming you know some of the differences between the Pharisees and the Herodians. Remind me, what are some of the differences between the Pharisees and the Herodians? Faith, yes. Are you saying the Pharisees had more faith?
Well, the Pharisees had faith in the God of the Bible, the Herodians had faith in Herod.
Yeah. Yeah, the Pharisees are far more Bible-believing. They're far more Jewish in the sense that, the Herodians, as the name would suggest, these are individuals who've kind of collapsed. They're supporters of Herod and that family. And that family was only, Herod the Great had virtually no Jewish blood. He married a Jewish woman, and so his sons had some Jewish blood. But they were outsiders. They were collaborators with Rome. They were generally despised. And so the Pharisees and the Herodians, you might think of it in these terms, the sanctimonious versus the sacrilegious. The Pharisees are the sanctimonious. They're highly religious. We think of them as being, Jesus called them hypocrites a lot. The Herodians are much more secular. They're much more open to Greek ideas, and so they're more the sacrilegious. The point of this being, you couldn't really put together two groups that are more unlikely to be together. They're natural competitors. They're natural enemies. They're not on the same page. And yet, of course, something or someone unites them, right? And that, of course, is their opposition to Jesus. They hold that in common. Perhaps for different reasons, but both of them are very opposed to Jesus. And so, because they have a common enemy, these unlikely bedfellows are in league with one another. So all of that also shows, so there's a certain hypocrisy in this, right? So they come to Jesus and they say to him, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances." Are those true words? I think those are pretty true words.
It's ironic coming from this group.
Yeah, it's very ironic, right? It really is. I mean, they're saying something that is accurate, that Jesus is a straight shooter, that Jesus isn't cowardly, that Jesus will speak the truth. And they're going to try to use that, though, against him. And this is a group that, these are shrewd political types. And so compromise and deception is just probably part of how they regularly function. And Jesus is not like them in that way. And so they come to ask him a question. And so verse 17, tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Any comments on that verse? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? What's the dilemma they're trying to create here? Or do you sometimes wonder that too? Why do I have to pay all these taxes? You know, should I just forsake the IRS? Now, the IRS isn't that old of an organization. You know that? What is the date of the IRS? Anybody know? It's amazing. It's not that long ago. Yeah, it's like 100 years ago, that the whole taxation system as we have it today began to develop. But, taxes are a reality in life, and it's obviously not an entirely new thing because this is a text from 2,000 years ago. I remember, I'm sure you do too, sometimes going to the Adventist church during the Christmas season. Any of you do that? And Dr. Flays played the Roman tax collector for a number of years, and he used to be my doctor, and you'd walk in there and he'd yell at you, and he played that role well. I think he enjoyed playing that role. But is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? So they're waiting for an answer from Jesus, but Jesus, aware of their malice. So that alerts us that Jesus sees through all of this. They're not asking a sincere question. They're trying to trap Jesus with his answer. So he says, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites?" You see why they disliked him so much.
He's telling the truth.
He is telling the truth. Yeah. He's fulfilling. They say you answer truthfully, you tell the truth, you call a spade a spade. And so he calls them hypocrites. Why do you put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me a coin for the tax. Now, in the background of all of this, part of why they were asking this question is that this particular tax had to be paid using a Roman coin. And the specific coin, as we see here in verse 19, is the denarius. And the denarius, again, it was a Roman coin, and therefore it had imagery and statements on the coin that no Jew could really accept. And so let me read to you a description of this particular coin. Remember, of course, Rome is an occupying power, and the denarius is described this way. On one side of the silver denarius was a profile of Tiberius Caesar. Now, we still do this today, right? You have a coin, and there's the profile of a face on the coin, a George Washington or a president or some person who's been significant. So this Roman coin, on the coin is the profile of Tiberius Caesar. Now that's not a problem. It's the Latin inscription that's with it that's the problem. And that inscription read as follows: Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. And so the word divine, that's a problem for a Jew, isn't it? So the Roman emperor was thought of as being a sort of semi-divine individual. And you would offer incense to the emperor and essentially have to, bow down and not only honor the emperor, but it would shade into worshiping the emperor. And you could see how a Jew who knows the Ten Commandments would have a profound struggle with this. On the other side of the coin, there was a picture of the Roman goddess of peace, Pax, with the Latin inscription, High Priest. Now, for everyday commerce, Jews were largely able to avoid using this coin because they did have access to other coins, minted coins that were more Jewish coins. But to pay taxes to Rome, there was no way around it. The tax had to be paid using this, what they considered to be a blasphemous coin. Does that make sense? The dilemma they feel, it really is a dilemma of allegiance. Where does my allegiance, what should I give my allegiance to? And so for some Jews, this was a crash of, it was their conscience was troubled by this. So that all of that, and perhaps more, is behind the question, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? It's not only that they object to, like we do, the IRS. Taxes are too high and it's a corrupt system or whatever. It's more than that. There's a religious dimension to all of this. Okay, but Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why do you put me to the test, you hypocrite? Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Now, there's something ironic in that observation. He says, "Show me the coin for the tax." They brought him a denarius. This is the dreaded denarius. This is the blasphemous denarius. This is the pagan coin of the Romans. This is the coin we despise. This is the coin we do not think you should have. This is the coin we're opposed to this coin. Jesus says, "Show me denarius." And the sense of it, if you could put in contemporary terms, is that one of those religious leaders said, "Okay," and he reached right into his pocket and pulled one out. You see? So it's showing the hypocrisy of their position. If they're really so opposed to this coin and all that it represents, how are they able to produce one immediately? So they're in possession of the very thing that they're so angry about and think is so awful, and they'll condemn it. And yet Jesus doesn't have a denarius. Jesus doesn't pull a denarius out of his pocket. It's the religious leaders produce one, and seemingly they produce it immediately. So it brings into question, really, how serious are they about all of this? And it's sort of condemning them because they're able to produce one of these coins. Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They said, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him, and they went away. So what is Jesus saying here? Now this is what we're going to spend the rest of our time with, so hopefully you have some thoughts, because otherwise we'll get done early, which I guess is okay. But what's the point of all of this?
It's imagery. You have the image of Caesar on the coin. That belongs to Caesar, but I think as human beings, we're created in the image of God. So it's a dichotomy between the two. You're paying for something that you afford, but also you got to remember that you are a product and made in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the other aspect of it is their hypocrisy is unbelievable. And it's like the hypocrisy now of our politicians. And one of the things that I liken this to is, and I've said this before in this class, but if you take a look at the members of Congress and of the Senate and how wealthy they become when they are elected to office. Mm-hmm. They supposedly have rules in this instance to keep them from doing what's classified as insider trading. But it's being broken again and again and again. So much so that if somebody like me with a license to sell securities did that, I would lose my license in minutes and possibly even be jailed.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole thing, it's about, this is very political.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Very political. And it's an imagery of what's taking place in our society today as well.
Mm-hmm. And so you're recognizing that the corruption within the religious leaders and within the whole system is still with us. It's really not new in that sense. It's
Historically correct.
yeah, the heart of man. What'd you say?
Historically correct.
Yeah, the heart of man is the same in each and every generation. You know, yeah.
This is really reminiscent of the position that Daniel and the three friends were in back at the time of Nebuchadnezzar. We are placed in an idolatrous world, and sometimes without the ability to change that. And so what Christ, I think he's alluding to Daniel, that you do what you need to do in an idolatrous country, but your allegiance is to God. So, Jesus is saying, your heart belongs to God. You give the taxes that you have to.
Yeah, and I want to come back to what Marilyn has just said, because I think that's really true. Let me just comment based on what Kelly said and just the corruption. Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7 is a great passage because it just gives us the answer to why things are the way that they are, and why it really shouldn't surprise us. I'm not going to read all of this to you because it's a pretty lengthy discussion, but it has the Pharisees are here and they're criticizing Jesus and his disciples, and this time the criticism is about all the traditions of washing when you go to the market. It's not just washing your hands before you eat. It involves that. It's more than that. It's washing properly, holding to the tradition of the elders. The word here, somewhere in all of this, I know, for washing is actually the word baptism. And so, in some extreme situations, and baptism in Jewish culture was by immersion. They did practice a proselyte baptism. If you wanted to become Jewish, you were baptized. And so, the word would suggest using a lot of water, but they're trying to wash away ceremonially. Because if you go out in the marketplace, what might happen to you? You might rub shoulders with a Gentile, perish the thought. And so before you can eat, you need to really wash up, because you need to wash that defilement off of you. There's a lot of things going on in all of this. But so Jesus' disciples, they're having lunch and they don't wash their hands, and so the Pharisees are just really irritated by this, and they start making accusations and so forth. And I'll just read the part beginning in verse 14. He called the people to him again and said to them, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. There's nothing outside a person that is going into him, that going into him can defile him. But the things that come out of a person are what defile him." And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable. And he said to them, "Then are you also without understanding?" Now that's a common kind of statement in the Gospels, isn't it? The disciples are really spiritually dense. And when you read the Gospels, it's like Jesus feeds the 5,000, Jesus feeds the 4,000, and then Jesus is on a boat and he says, "Beware the leaven of the Pharisees." And the disciples are looking around in the boat and they're thinking, "We have no bread, we're going to starve to death." And Jesus is, reminding us we didn't bring food. They're just so dense. They really are. It takes them so long to figure out who Jesus is. Finally, Peter confesses Christ, Jesus as the Christ, and then the next thing out of his mouth is all wrong and backwards. So they didn't understand. Are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him? Now there's an application to this, as we'll see in a moment, to the dietary laws of the Old Testament. Because the context here is eating. The context is food. And Jesus is saying that if you eat a certain type of food, it doesn't defile you. I used to, as a young person, I got tripped up on this text a little bit because when I read the words, do you not see that whatever goes into a person from the outside cannot defile him? And I thought as a young person, well, there's a lot of things in this world that if I do this or view this, it defiles me, like pornography, right? That's defiling. But that's not what Jesus is talking about here. You got to ask the question, what's the context of this? And the context is eating food. And so Jesus is saying it doesn't matter what you eat. So I guess you could say if you eat bacon, it's not going to defile you. Since it enters not his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled. Thus he declared all foods clean. And I think that's a real valid application of this text because of the context of what they're actually talking about. Washing your hands before you eat. And he said, but here's the point I want to draw your attention to. What comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. Pretty substantial list, isn't it? All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. And they reveal that a person has a defiled heart. And so theologically, we would describe this as Jesus is here affirming the depravity of the human race. He's affirming the brokenness of us as people. And so when we have these stories of deep corruption, or when we have these stories of school counselors lying to parents, ultimately, our explanation for why these things happen, or why Nancy Pelosi has made several $100 million since she became Speaker of the House in the stock market. So either she is the most brilliant person out there, or there's something else going on like insider trading. There's no third explanation for this, really. Well, the explanation's in this text, and it's the evilness of the human heart. And that's been a problem since Genesis chapter 3, and it was a problem in the first century, and it's still a problem today. But what's changed in our culture, and what's worrisome about this, is that when our culture understood the depravity of the human heart, we were safer because we at least had a diagnosis for the problem. Whereas today, there's almost a universal rejection of the fallenness of the human heart. And that's a more dangerous situation to be in. You think about even from a political perspective, why did the Founding Fathers establish a government that seems so inefficient to us? Or you've got a president, an executive, you've got a Congress that's divided between two houses, you've got a Supreme Court. The whole idea of separation of powers, why did they do that? Because they believed in the depravity of the human heart. They understood that if you give too much power to one branch of government, that will not go well for us. And so they understood the safest way forward is to create a government with checks and balances because of the fundamental brokenness of the human heart. So, you were going to say something?
Thought from back to the Matthew passage, I think I thought you went to a different place in Matthew, Mark 7. He was talking about, earlier he's talking about, well, verse 8, you leave the commandment of God and hold the tradition of he's talking about, he goes on to say, you don't give to your parents because you say, well, that has been given to God. You know, so these Pharisees are coming to Jesus saying, should we follow the tradition of man and pay Caesar, or follow the tradition of God? And how do those work together? And in this passage, they make it pretty clear that they don't follow the tradition of God even when they're following the religious ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, and coming back to the Matthew text, because that's primarily where we're focusing on. The text in Mark was a little bit of a rabbit trail. But I think the main point of the Matthew text is the idea that there are matters that belong to the state, and there are matters that belong to God. And so we really are citizens of two kingdoms. And that's the way the church father Augustine understood it. He wrote a book on this subject. That we're citizens of the kingdom of God, and our primary allegiance must be there. But we are also citizens of an earthly kingdom. And we do have rights and we have responsibilities to both of these. And so let me just read, these are just now my notes, is trying to summarize some of this. So I want you to just consider the thought that this issue of, here we are as people trying to figure out how do we respond to so many of these issues where the state is taking a position that seems so contrary to a Christian worldview or the Word of God. We recognize we have a responsibility to the state, we have a responsibility to God. Sometimes these are in conflict. There are matters that belong to the realm of civil government, and there are matters that belong to God's realm. Now, Jesus does not here specify which matters belong to which realm, but many Christian ethicists today teach that, in general, civil government should allow freedom in matters of religious doctrine, worship, and beliefs about God and the church, should not attempt to use the power of government to enforce allegiance to any specific religious viewpoint. Totalitarian governments usually try to suppress the church and subsume everything under the realm of the state. Now, I want to read from the Westminster Confession of Faith, as this is a historic confessional statement, and as they have a chapter in the confession on civil government and the church, or the role of Christians in terms of civil government. And so it's a paragraph. It says, God, the supreme Lord and King of all the world, hath ordained civil magistrates to be under him, over the people for his own glory and the public good. And to this end hath armed them with the power of the sword, for the defense and encouragement of them that are good, and for the punishment of evildoers. Civil magistrates may not assume to themselves the administration of the word and sacraments, or the power of the keys of the kingdom of heaven, or in the least interfere on matters of faith. Okay, so these statements are trying to find a balance on these two issues. So Jesus acknowledges that citizens have an obligation to support the state. However, that support is limited. And think about this. Rome was to be paid a denarius. In contrast, the command to honor God is left unqualified. That's the way I would think about this. You owe to Rome a denarius, you owe to God everything. Okay? And so how this applies to individual specific situations is going to be difficult. But the big idea again is that we have responsibilities to the state, we have responsibilities to God, but the responsibilities to the state are ultimately limited. The responsibilities we have to God are unlimited. Okay? Any thoughts on that? Because that's what I prepared today, so I'm basically done. So, but just any thoughts or observations?
John, I wish that Dan was here to read his letter, because this would just tie in so completely with what he wrote his letter. And how one of the points that he made to the board, and he said, this will take courage on your part to make hard decisions. And that really stuck with me. It wasn't a demand, it was thoughtful. And it was so thoughtful that one of our school board members, who's very intellectual, was moved to tears and could hardly choke out some of her words. She was the first to respond. And could hardly pull that emotion back down. That she was so moved by his stand, which was not defensive, it was factual. And so this would just tie in so well with what you just told us.
Oh, good.
I think what you're saying is it's a lot harder to give the entirety of your heart to God than it is to toss a silly coin to the state. If they need this stupid coin, give it to them. You worry about your heart.
Well, and I'm saying that although we owe something to the civil magistrate or to the civil government, there's a limit to that. What we owe to God is absolute. And when the two do come into when they come into absolute conflict, there's really no question here as to whom we must obey. And yet we should do so with compassion and with respect because God institutes government. And so to go into a situation and just be belligerent and rude is really to deny that God has instituted these institutions, and so they should be respected. That's why the president should be respected, right? We really struggle to do that at times, right? And I've heard all the negative comments, that are made about whoever's in the office, whether it's Trump or Obama or Biden. We should respect the office. I think that's right in the eyes of God. But there are times when we must have compassion and courage and speak truth.
He opened with compassion, and he, toward the end of his talk, and he was reading his paper, had a call to courage. And that was amazing.
Yeah.
I went up, we know a lot of these folks, so afterwards, I just went up to talk to them, and they were very moved by his letter. It was very thoughtful.
Yeah, and then it gets into a different discussion, a different issue, I guess for a different day, but would be, what do you do when lesser magistrates don't agree with higher magistrates? What do you do when the state says you must do this, and a lower official at a school board level says we cannot do that? Those are difficult issues.
That in Virginia, because that's exactly in reverse what's going on. So the governor has said masks are optional in school, and 7 school districts are saying no, we're required it. So I would like to see that somehow resolved.
Yeah, Ruth?
Oh, hate the sin, love the sinner. We respect the presidency. We might not necessarily respect what the person in the presidency is.
Yeah, it's like you salute the uniform. Sometimes the man in the uniform is a different story, but you salute the uniform.
On Friday, on Thursday, was listening to the radio where a senior at Washougal High School organized, "We will not wear masks today." And there was 100 students that actually followed that. He was very well spoken and talked about rights. And so 100 students were not wearing masks. When they got to school, they said, "We're going to disobey civilly. We're going to answer with respect when we are told to put our mask on. But if they will not allow us in, we'll go home." And so it was a civil disobedience, but it was very well organized, and it was impressive. We listened to this young man speak on the radio, and he was well-spoken and had everything mapped out, and they did exactly that. So 100 kids went home that day, and they made a statement.
Yeah.
And he threatened the freshmen not to
Yeah.
take advantage, horse them around and do something stupid.
Yes, I love that, because he really spoke well to them.
All right, so we'll close for today, but, I mean, just things to think about as we think about, these are more, we're looking more at the forest today rather than the trees. What does the forest teach us about our responsibility to the state, our responsibility to God? And as we move forward, these are going to increasingly come into conflict, I think. And obviously, there's a lot of situations that's going to, I think, going to come to a place of saying, I recognize the state has authority, but I cannot submit to the state's authority on this issue, because to do so is to go against God. So, but to do that thoughtfully and to recognize, a text like this, Jesus is giving us some guidelines as to what that looks like and how that should be done. So, okay. So I'll be